He slapped me in front of 300 wedding guests, and the sound of it was louder than the music, louder than the applause that had been building just seconds before. My own wedding day, and my husband's hand met my face while our families watched, while the string quartet still had their bows raised, while my mother's champagne glass hung frozen halfway to her lips. What none of them knew, what he never saw coming, was what I did in the 60 seconds after. My name is Naomi Whitfield, and I was 31 years old on the day I became a headline in my own family's memory. Not the good kind of headline, not the kind you frame and hang in a hallway. The kind people whisper about at Thanksgiving for the next 20 years, lowering their voices even though everyone already knows the story. I want to tell you how I got there, because a slap doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from somewhere, and if you listen close, you can hear it building for months before it ever lands. I met Derek Sinclair at a mutual friend's dinner party, the kind where everyone is a little too polished and a little too aware of who's watching. He wasn't the loudest man in the room, but he had this way of making you feel like you were the only person worth listening to. He asked me questions and actually waited for the answers. He remembered small things, the name of my childhood dog, the fact that I took my coffee with oat milk, not almond. Little things, the things that make a woman lower her guard. I fell for him slowly, the way you fall asleep. Not all at once, just a gradual heaviness in the eyelids until you're gone. For the first year, I would have told you he was the kindest man I'd ever known. He opened doors. He called just to hear my voice. He cried, actually cried, at his grandmother's funeral, and something about that softness made me trust him completely. I thought a man who could grieve so openly could never hurt anyone. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet, not for a long time. The first crack came quietly, almost a year into dating. We were at a friend's birthday dinner, and I laughed a little too long at another man's joke. Nothing improper, nothing that should have mattered. But in the car afterward, Derek was silent in a way that felt like a held breath. When I asked what was wrong, he said, very calmly, "I just didn't like how you were looking at him." I remember laughing, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. That was the pattern, though I couldn't see it clearly then, the calm voice that carried something sharp underneath it, like a knife wrapped in silk. He never raised his voice in public, never made a scene. His control was the thing that fooled me, because I had grown up believing that anger looked like shouting, like slammed doors. I didn't know that anger could look like stillness, like a man quietly deciding, behind calm eyes, that you had done something unforgivable. We got engaged 18 months after we met. I remember my sister, Callie, pulling me aside at the engagement party, her eyes searching mine a little too carefully. "You seem happy," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I am," I told her, and in that specific moment I believed it. "You seem happy" is a strange thing to say to someone you're worried about. Callie has always had a gift for saying exactly what she means without saying what she actually means. I understood it later. I didn't understand it then. The wedding planning brought out something in Derek I hadn't seen before, or maybe I had seen it in small doses and simply refused to name it. He wanted control over everything. The guest list, the seating chart, even my dress, which he hadn't seen but somehow had opinions about, relayed through comments like, "Just don't wear anything too tight, people will talk." People will talk. That phrase became his favorite leash. He used it to keep me small, to keep me quiet, to keep me exactly where he wanted me, smiling, agreeable, and afraid of being seen as anything other than perfect. I told myself it was wedding stress. Everyone gets tense before a wedding, don't they? I told myself a lot of things that year. I was very good at telling myself things. 3 weeks before the wedding, I found a message on his phone. Not the kind of message you can misread. Not the kind you can explain away with a generous imagination. A woman named Priya, someone from his office, and a string of texts that made my stomach drop somewhere below the floor. I confronted him that night, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone up to show him. "It's nothing," he said. His voice didn't waver. That was the part that frightened me most, how easily the lie came, like it had been sitting ready in his mouth for weeks. "She's just a friend going through a hard time. You're reading into things." "Derek, she said she misses your hands." My voice cracked on the word hands. I hated that it cracked. I hated that even in that moment, some small, humiliated part of me was performing calmness for him. "You're twisting her words," he said. And then, softer, almost gentle, "Naomi, don't do this 3 weeks before our wedding. Don't blow up something good over a misunderstanding." Something good. He said it like a fact, not an opinion. Like the goodness of what we had was not up for debate, only my willingness to see it clearly. I wanted to believe him. God help me, I wanted to believe him so badly that I let myself. I told my mother it was a misunderstanding. I told Callie the same thing, though she looked at me with an expression I still remember, not quite disbelief, more like grief. Like she was already mourning something she knew I wasn't ready to lose. "You don't have to marry him," she said quietly, the night before the rehearsal dinner. We were sitting on my bed, surrounded by garment bags and gift boxes, everything smelling faintly of lilies from the centerpiece samples. 300 people are coming, Callie. 300 people will survive a canceled wedding. Will you survive that marriage? I didn't answer her. I picked up a seating chart instead, like the answer to my sister's question could be found among assigned tables and centerpiece arrangements. I told her I loved him. I told her people fight, people make mistakes, and love means working through it. I believed every word as I said it. That's the terrible thing about self-deception, it doesn't feel like lying. It feels like faith. The morning of the wedding, I woke up with a strange, hollow calm. My mother helped me into my dress, her fingers trembling slightly on the buttons, and I remember catching her eye in the mirror and seeing something there I chose not to examine too closely. Worry, maybe. Or a mother's instinct, the kind that knows before the mind is willing to admit it. The ceremony was beautiful. I won't pretend otherwise. The venue was an old converted barn draped in white flowers, string lights woven through the rafters like a captured constellation. Everyone said how radiant I looked. How lucky Derek was. I smiled and thanked them, and some part of me actually felt lucky too, standing there at the altar, watching him wait for me at the end of the aisle in his charcoal suit, his eyes wet with what looked, from a distance, like genuine emotion. We said our vows. I promised to love him in sickness and in health, and he promised the same, his voice steady and warm, performing sincerity with the same ease he'd used to explain away Priya 3 weeks earlier. I didn't see the performance then. I only saw a man who loved me. The reception moved into full swing by early evening. Toasts were given. My father cried during his speech, the good kind of crying, and for a while I let myself believe that maybe this really was the beginning of something good, that maybe I had simply been anxious over nothing. And then Priya walked in. I don't know who invited her. I never found out, not really, though I have theories I'll get to later. I only know that at 8:40 in the evening, while I was standing near the dessert table talking to my aunt, I looked up and saw her crossing the room in a deep red dress, her eyes fixed not on me, but on Derek. I watched my new husband's face change, just for a second. A flicker of something, panic, maybe, or a kind of guilty recognition, before he composed himself and walked toward her, weaving through the crowd like he was trying to intercept a live wire before it touched water. I followed. I don't know why. Some instinct in me needed to hear what was about to be said, needed the truth even though every rational part of me was screaming to turn around. Go back to the dessert table. Let it go. Don't ruin your own wedding. I reached them near the edge of the dance floor, just as Priya said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. You told me you were calling it off. You told me this wasn't real. The music didn't stop. That's the strange thing I remember most. The band kept playing, some upbeat cover song, completely indifferent to the fact that my entire life was quietly detonating 6 feet away from the cake table. Derek, I said, my voice very small. What is she talking about? He turned to me, and for one terrible second I watched him decide something. I watched him choose, not the truth, not comfort. He chose control. Naomi, don't make a scene, he said, low and fast, gripping my arm harder than he needed to. Not here, not in front of everyone. I'm not making a scene, Derek, she just said. I said drop it. His grip tightened. And something in me, something that had been silent and swallowed for 2 years, finally opened its mouth. Let go of me. I don't know exactly what happened in the next 3 seconds. I know I pulled my arm free. I know I said something else, something sharp, something true, the kind of sentence that cuts through pretending like a blade through silk. I know his face changed color, went pale and then red, his jaw locking in a way I'd seen only once before, the night of the birthday dinner, the night with the laugh that lasted too long. And then his hand came up, and the sound of it against my face was the loudest thing in that barn full of 300 people who loved us, who had traveled from 4 different states to watch us promise forever to each other. The music stopped then. Somebody screamed. I think it was my mother. I remember the sting first, sharp and electric, and then the silence that followed it, a silence so total I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, could hear the soft rustle of 300 people going rigid with shock all at once. I stood there, my cheek burning, my vision blurred with sudden, furious tears. And in that silence, in front of everyone who had ever loved me, I felt something shift inside my chest, something cold and clear and absolutely certain. He thought that slap was the end of something. A punctuation mark on an argument he intended to win, the way he'd won every argument for 2 years, with control and calm and quiet threats disguised as concern. He had no idea it was only the beginning. Because as 300 faces stared at us in horror, as my mother pushed through the crowd toward me, as Priya stood frozen with her hand over her mouth, I reached up, slowly, and unclasped something from around my neck. Something small. Something he had given me on our first anniversary. Something he didn't know I'd been carrying quietly for the last 3 weeks, ever since the night I read those messages on his phone. Derek's eyes dropped to my hand, and I watched the color drain out of his face all over again, this time not from anger, but from something closer to fear. It was a small recorder. The kind you can buy for less than $30, thin as a stick of gum, with a tiny red light that had been blinking, quietly, faithfully, clipped beneath the delicate chain of my necklace since the moment I put my dress on that morning. I recorded us, I said. My voice was shaking, but it was steady enough to carry. I recorded this conversation, and I recorded the one 3 weeks ago, the one where you told me Priya was nothing, the one where you told me I was twisting her words. The barn was so quiet I could hear the string lights humming faintly overhead. Naomi, Derek started, and I watched him reach for that same calm voice, that same sill-crapped knife he always used to smooth things over. But it didn't work this time, because everyone was watching, because for once his performance had an audience that wasn't just me. I wasn't planning to use it, I said, and that part was true. I want you to understand that. I hadn't put that recorder on my dress that morning with some elaborate plan for revenge. I'd put it there out of fear, a small, desperate insurance policy, the kind a woman carries when some quiet, unspoken part of her doesn't fully trust the promises she's about to make. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I'd never actually need it. I was going to marry you anyway, I said, louder now, and something in my chest cracked open as I said it, some old wall finally giving way. I was going to spend forever excusing you. That's what I do. I excuse you. I excused Priya. I excuse the way you squeeze my arm when you're angry. I excuse the way you make everything my fault, every single time, so smoothly I don't even notice you're doing it until I'm apologizing for something that isn't mine to apologize for. My mother had reached me by then. Her hand was on my back, warm and trembling. Somewhere behind her, Callie stood frozen with her hand pressed over her mouth, tears streaking down her face, not from shock, I realized later, but from a strange, aching relief. She'd been waiting 2 years for me to say these words. She just never imagined I'd say them in a wedding dress. Derek's jaw tightened. "You're embarrassing yourself," he said quietly, leaning close, his voice dropping into that register only I was meant to hear. "Turn that thing off. We'll talk about this at home." "There is no home," I said. "There is no us, not after this." "Naomi, we just got married 4 hours ago." "And you just hit me in front of everyone we know," I said. "In front of your own mother, Derek. Look at her. Look at what you did." He didn't look. That told me everything I needed to know about the man I'd almost spent my life with. He didn't even turn his head to see his mother's face, pale and stricken, one hand pressed to her chest like she might be sick. The silence stretched, thin and unbearable, until my father stepped forward. I hadn't even seen him cross the room. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply stood beside me, solid and steady, the way he'd stood beside me my whole life, and said, "I think it's time for you to leave, son." Not our home, not our venue. Just leave. And something about the quiet finality of it, the complete absence of anger in his voice, seemed to land harder than any shout could have. Derek looked around the room, maybe searching for allies, for someone who would step in and say this was all a misunderstanding, that everyone was overreacting. But there was no one. Even his own groomsmen, the friends who'd stood beside him at the altar just hours earlier, wouldn't meet his eyes. Whatever spell he'd cast over the room, over me, over the last 2 years of my life, it had broken the second his palm met my cheek. He left. I remember watching him walk out through those big barn doors, his shoulders squared in a kind of wounded dignity, like he was the one who'd been wronged. The door swung shut behind him, and for a moment nobody moved. Then, slowly, the room exhaled. I wish I could tell you I felt triumphant in that moment. I didn't. I felt hollowed out, scraped clean, standing in my wedding dress in a barn full of wilting flowers and half-eaten cake, my cheek still stinging, my new husband gone, my marriage over before it had really begun. My mother wrapped her arms around me, and I finally let myself cry, not delicate, movie star tears, but the ugly, gasping kind, the kind that comes from somewhere much older than that single afternoon. I think I was crying for more than the slap. I was crying for 2 years of small surrenders, 2 years of quietly making myself smaller so he'd have less to be angry about. I was crying because some stubborn, hopeful part of me really had believed we were going to be happy. Callie found me a few minutes later, sitting on an overturned crate behind the barn, my veil crumpled in my lap, the cool evening air finally clearing some of the fog from my head. "I should have made you listen to me sooner," she said, sitting beside me, her wedding guest heels sinking slightly into the grass. "You couldn't have made me do anything," I said. "I had to see it myself." "I'm just glad you finally did." She took my hand. "That took more courage than I've ever seen you have, Nomi, standing up like that, in front of everyone." I didn't feel courageous. I felt like I was falling apart. Sometimes, that's exactly what courage looks like from the inside. I've thought about that sentence more times than I can count in the months since. Sometimes that's exactly what courage looks like from the inside. The days after the wedding were a strange, disorienting blur. Canceled honeymoon flights. A hotel refund I had to fight for, well-meaning relatives who didn't know whether to say congratulations or I'm sorry. So they said nothing at all, just hugged me a little too long. I moved back into my old apartment, the one I'd almost given up the lease on, grateful in a way I never expected to be that I hadn't fully unpacked my old life yet. Derek texted for weeks. Apologies at first, long messages about stress and jealousy and how much he loved me, how sorry he was, how it would never happen again. When those didn't work, the messages turned colder, accusations that I had humiliated him, that I'd planned the whole scene, that recording him was some kind of betrayal, as though the truth itself was the crime, and not the hand that had struck me in front of 300 witnesses. I didn't respond to most of them. I didn't need to. I had that little recorder, and I had 300 people who'd watched it happen with their own eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't need his version of events to feel real. I had my own. The annulment process took a few months. Quiet, unglamorous, nothing like the wedding that had preceded it. I sat across from a lawyer with tired eyes and a kind voice, and I signed papers that undid, on record, what had never really been right to begin with. Priya reached out to me once, a few weeks after the wedding. I almost didn't read the message. Part of me expected cruelty, or excuses, or some attempt to justify what she'd done. Instead, it was an apology, a real one, messy and honest, admitting that Derek had told her the wedding was a formality, a favor to his mother, something he was already planning to walk away from. She said she came to the wedding because she didn't believe him anymore, and she needed to see the truth for herself. I understood that more than I wanted to. We'd both been lied to by the same calm, steady voice. We'd both mistaken his stillness for sincerity. I won't pretend I forgave her right away, but I understood her. And in a strange way, understanding her helped me understand myself a little better too. How easily any of us can be persuaded to believe a story someone else is telling, especially when we want so badly for it to be true. It's been almost a year now since that night in the barn. I still think about it sometimes, usually late at night when the apartment is quiet and my mind wanders somewhere it shouldn't. I think about the string lights and the sound the slap made, louder somehow than it should have been, like the whole room had been holding its breath just to hear it. I think about the small red light blinking beneath my collarbone, patient and unnoticed, waiting for a moment I hoped I'd never need it for. People ask me sometimes if I regret wearing that recorder, if it feels strange, having planned for the worst on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I tell them the truth, I don't regret it at all. I regret needing it. I regret 2 years of quiet warning signs I talked myself out of seeing. But I don't regret being ready. Some part of me, some quiet, watchful part I hadn't fully listened to, already knew who Derek was long before the rest of me caught up. I got a small apartment across town, close to Callie, close enough that we have dinner together most Sundays now, the way we used to before Derek slowly, carefully, pulled me away from the people who loved me. I started therapy in the spring. I go every Tuesday afternoon, and some weeks it feels like real progress, and some weeks it feels like digging up things I'd rather leave buried. But I keep going. I think that matters more than feeling strong every single week. Last month, I ran into my old wedding photographer at a coffee shop, of all places. She recognized me before I recognized her, and after a moment of awkward hesitation, she told me something I didn't expect. She said the photo she remembered most from that day wasn't the ceremony, or the first dance, or any of the posed portraits we'd taken by the barn doors that morning. It was a candid shot she caught by accident, right after everything happened, me standing in the grass outside, veil crumpled, chin lifted, looking directly into the camera like I dared it to look away. She said it was the strongest photograph she'd ever taken. She said she still thinks about it sometimes. I asked her to send it to me. It arrived in my inbox that same evening, and I sat and looked at it for a long time before I understood why it moved me the way it did. I didn't look broken in that photograph. I looked like someone who had just found the edge of her own strength and stepped onto it without knowing yet whether it would hold. It held. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust someone again the way I trusted Derek in those early days, back when I still believed calm meant safe and quiet meant kind. But I know I trust myself more now than I ever did while I was with him. I know I'll never again mistake my own silence for peace. Sometimes the people closest to us show us exactly who they are, quietly, patiently, over months and years, long before the moment the whole room finally sees it too. The only question that matters is whether we're brave enough to believe what we're seeing before 300 people have to see it for us. I was 3 years too late in believing it. But I believed it in the end, and that, I've come to understand, is its own kind of beginning. And I held it up, right there in front of everyone, so he could see exactly what it was.